Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Cox. I'm a member of the Netcapital team. Let's allow one moment for folks to settle in, and then we'll dig right into the live Q&A with Innovus Power. Thanks for joining. While we're getting situated, though, feel free to use the chat feature built into Zoom. Tell us where you're calling in from, where you're stationed at the time. We love seeing folks from all over the United States and the world come join these. And so now we already have a bunch of folks coming in here. So feel free to use the chat feature in Zoom and tell us a little bit about where you're coming from. I'm calling from just south of Los Angeles in Orange County. And Mark, you're all over the place these days, but where are you situated right now?
I'm in our office and development facility in Sacramento, California.
Okay, cool. So you're out here as well right now. That's great. We got the Bay Area and SoCal on the line so far, but we tend to get, I know I recognize a couple of names. I know we have some folks in here from Boston. I think we see some Florida on the line here, some New York. So let's see if we can keep this as wide of a net as possible. Mark, did you visit Sacramento as part of your schooling here and then just stick around? I remember our trip to our state's capital. Or did you were you always around Sacramento
Oh, no,
or just for the business?
I'm actually from originally from New Jersey. So I went to school in upstate New York, kind of did a New England loop with GE over a number of years, and then joined a company at that time called Allied Signal. Then we acquired Honeywell and became known as Honeywell, and that took me to the West Coast. So LA, Phoenix, and then Northern California, and I haven't left Northern California since.
Oh, it was the Honeywell acquisition that brought you out. I thought you have a mellow California vibe, so I thought you were here longer than that.
No, it was actually before that happened. So Allied Signal was the old Allied Chemical, a bunch of other businesses, and so they brought me out to be head of manufacturing for their aerospace sector in LA, and then they transferred me to Phoenix, where they was head of manufacturing operations and supply chain for their aircraft engine business. So have to admit, Phoenix was too hot. So my first venture back company that I got involved with, I'd moved so many times by then, was Intuitive Surgical, and that was in Northern California. So that's what got me up here, and haven't left since. And that was in the late '90s.
Oh, you're local now. That's fantastic. I see some
Right.
folks from yeah, we have some more New Jersey on the line here represented. Got a shout out for New Jersey. So got a lot of East Coasters, a couple West Coasters. But thanks for everybody for joining. So excited to be on the line with Mark Hoffman here. He is the founder and CEO of Innovus Power. A couple quick housekeeping items. As always, the speaker on the line here is actively raising capital on the Netcapital platform. I'm going to add a link to that into the chat feature here. Looks like another Arizona, Indiana on the line here. So cool. So the chat link is available there. You can go to netcapital.com/companies/Innovus Power, INNOVUS POWER, or you can go to Netcapital and search Innovus and you'll find it there. Or you can go to click the link that I've added into the chat feature there. While I've been encouraging everybody to engage with the chat so far, please now switch over to the Q&A feature built into Zoom. That's the easiest way to track the questions as they come in. We do want to keep this as interactive as possible, so please do ask your questions. And we do want to make sure it's in the Q&A feature because that's definitely the simplest way to make sure we see as many of them and address as many of them as we possibly can. They've got a good group of people on the line here. We want to keep this a lively conversation, so please do ask those questions. But with all that being said, please join me in welcoming Mark Hoffman. Mark, let's start off with talking about what is Innovus Power, the problem that you're solving, and the solution that your team has developed here. And I know you have some slides to share with us.
Yeah. Well, so why don't I do that? I will do a screen share. Bear with me. Everybody see my screen?
Yes, we do. And this is in the PowerPoint view.
Yeah. Let me see if I can get it in the presentation view. All right. Everybody see it?
We're still on the other side with the table of contents, but I know you just had the presentations view up. Maybe
Hold
we have
on.
to
Let me
switch over to that one. Yeah.
let me see if that. Sorry, gang, I'm a little challenged here. I don't know why it's doing this.
No problem. Yeah, it's just like we did right before we started. So I think once you select that present mode and then just switch over to that other view.
You're still not seeing it?
Nope. Now it's just the two of us right now. Okay, so now we're back up into full PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's not. So I'm just going to use this version if that's okay.
That works.
I don't want to waste any more time. I'm not able to somehow get the full screen share.
I can also share
So
my
anyway,
screen if you'd like me to, and then you could just tell me
yeah,
when to change sides.
yeah, why don't we do it that way? That
Let me
sounds
try.
better.
Let me give it one go. And then if this doesn't look smooth, then I will switch over to you. And all my stuff is hidden here. Move some things around here. Okay. Did that look like a full screen PowerPoint to you?
Perfect.
Okay, cool.
Okay, let's go to the next page. So essentially, the summary that we're going to talk through and give everybody a chance to ask questions about. I what gets us and at least our his legacy investors most excited about the company is if we think about the history of power over 130 years, it's always been about getting power to the masses, was really about keeping it as low cost as you can or could, and that meant taking low cost, readily available fuels, coal, nuclear, natural gas in more recent years, hydro where it's available, and basically build big power plants. Bigger is better, better economics, uh, massive transmission and distribution lines. And that's how most of us get power to this day. And if you were unfortunate and you were off grid, you couldn't really get to those grids. You could get power through remote power facilities like diesel gensets, and you always paid a huge premium for that because the cost of diesel was high. And so as a result, we've always been beholden to utilities who own and operate these power facilities and transmission systems. And imagine the implications if, well, wait a second, what would happen if we can create on-site generation where you're at, where it's at, or more cost effective or lower cost than what your utility could provide? That's a major game changer. It's like cellular technology decades ago, basically displacing the wired world of Bell telephone. So that has tremendous ramifications. And as a result, we really have very vast markets, whether it's what traditionally we've been calling gridded or utility scale markets. We also have vast markets on off-grid markets where we've also significantly improved those capabilities. Our technology is unique. We have meaningful IP around it. Our products, we're at a stage where we have a number of systems that have been operating for a number of years. So we've validated not just our technology, but more importantly, the performance of our product in terms of the benefits they provide our customers in our target markets. We'll talk about our pipeline, which is rapidly growing in a good way. We're having a hard time keeping up with it. What investors, I think, also get very excited about is we're really a capital efficient company. We don't have to invest in what I would call meat and potatoes manufacturing, although we do design and create our own power control management systems. Most of the products we sell can be put together very low, inexpensively, in some cases by suppliers. Uh, and we have a leadership team, and we'll go through the bios towards the end. We've proven through our careers that we know, not just we understand the market we're in, we understand the capabilities that we need to succeed in our markets. But I've certainly got many, many battle scars and some other of our team members, what it's like to take a company basically from zero to a major player and having dealt with businesses at these different stages. So with that, let's move to the next slide. So the way to think about what we do is if you look at the picture to the right, when traditional power systems have essentially had a utility, if you look at that picture on the left, the utility tied to end customer, well, as different energy sources have come into the mix, and I'll talk more about that as we go. Now you got to pull it all together, and what we call a hub and spokes type system. Well, once you have a hub and spoke system, you need a brain, a heart and brain to manage it. That's why we call ourselves the heart and brain of a microgrid. A microgrid, by the way, in terms of scale, is anywhere from a home to typically people would see a microgrid powering could be a commercial or industrial facility, a hospital, a government installation. They could be islanded, a community, or they could be grid tied. So that's essentially what a microgrid. So we focus on that scale. So we sell the microgrid system. We also sell in every system, we sell the controls for that. One qualification that's important when I say we sell the microgrid system, we often partner. Our customers could be solar providers or our customers provide the wind. We don't typically sell, we never have sold wind through power systems through. Our customers usually provide the solar. We generally provide everything else. In some cases, with some exceptions. We also have a services business. So because our design capability has become so meaningful and differentiating in terms of what solutions best fit a given application in terms of which power sources, how should that energy deployed, we found in 2020 that we could actually develop a revenue stream just by selling that design service. So we have major customers that pay us just to do that. Last year, as an example, we landed Kaiser Permanente to relook at all 100 plus of their facilities in terms of evaluating what they have versus what they should have. And we get paid for that, regardless of whether we eventually sell them a microgrid to support one of their facilities. Obviously, we have an O&M business that goes with all that. And we'll talk more about the target markets as we go through the deck. Next slide. So what's the problem we're solving? Well, depending on where you are, either some or all of these should hit everybody on this call. Most of the world is seeing a continuing cost of power going up. Some areas, of course, more rapidly than others, to the point that power decades ago was kind of a small bite in people's wallets, to a point where people are out there saying, "Holy Lord, I'm not sure if I can afford the power bill." So cost of power is becoming a major problem in the U.S. and areas like California, New England. It's always been a problem in areas like Alaska and Hawaii, where people would have thought would be the case. All across Europe. So bottom line is cost of power is one of the biggest issues out there, if not the biggest issue driving people coming to us. CO2 is certainly going up in a way that people had hoped it wouldn't, but it's even though we've seen a rapid escalation of solar and wind power over the decades, it hasn't had the impact that people have thought. Outages are going up, so people are more interested in having, again, an ability to keep power going wherever they're at. And one of the more recent years, we're seeing a big increase in demand for power. So people are not just getting power if they're trying to expand capacity or open up new facilities and having a quick yes. They're finding an unknown of what they can get, how long it's going to take. And the biggest driver of that is everybody's probably read about our data centers. A data center, frankly, requires so much power, at least a large one. It literally is the equivalent of a nuclear power plant. It's that much of a power hog. So these are causing stresses across everything. Next slide. So to really understand how we fix that issue and how we address those problems for our customers, to set the table, I need to dig a little deeper into the way the systems have been traditionally set up, and I touched on that a little bit in my introduction. So what we would call utility, your centralized power scale, bringing power to the masses was essentially taking coal or nuclear fuels, consolidating them into large power plants. And of course, as I said earlier, distributing them to cities and metropolitan areas. And it was a very simple supply and demand that was easy to balance. You size the power plant to or plants to the areas they serve. And just like your car, you would inject more or less fuel depending as your demands went up and down. And literally, the bigger your grid, so to speak, or your client base, the more gradually your loads would rise and fall. And again, your power systems on the front end of that were really sized to deal with the rate of demand increases and decreases. If you were off grid, you had pretty much the same dynamic. It was just you didn't really have a big grid infrastructure or transmission line, distribution line infrastructure, except your diesel gensets basically, which is simply an engine and a generator tied together, supplying power to, say, a community or a mining operation, and kind of the same simple supply and demand. So very simple concept and worked quite well for 100-something years, but then the wheels started falling off. Next slide. So the good news is, as solar and wind have really been rising rapidly in our landscape, they have had an impact on slowing down CO2 growth. And if you look in the chart on the lower left, they've actually achieved cost levels as an energy source. That chart in the lower right shows how the cost of wind and solar have literally come down close to the cost of what people would traditionally call fossil generation and nuclear generation sources in terms of dollars per kilowatt hour. But the problem is, is if we think about solar and wind, intuitively, we know they're not always there as we need it. And so the industry uses the term dispatchability. If you have an energy source that can be there as you need it and ramped up and down as you need it, as traditional power energy sources have been. But with solar and wind, you don't know when you're having it and how much you're going to have. Most people intuitively understand wind power is volatile. We can feel it, we can see it. What most people don't realize, even with solar power, clouds coming over solar panels can literally reduce the amount of power by as much as 70 and 80%. When the cloud's overhead and when the cloud disappears, it comes back. So the chart you're seeing in the upper right is an actual chart from a solar farm in Florida, taken from a number of years ago, and you can see how volatile the solar is. So because of not just their volatility, but because you don't know when and how much you're going to have and when, we've had to tie them, of course, to our traditional power systems, which were never designed to balance all of that. And now you have chaos. So imagine now you have systems that were designed, power systems designed to handle the ups and downs of this gradual, if it's a big grid, it's a gradual rise and fall of demand as the day goes on. More power, as we all know, is demanded in the evening than in the morning, less in the middle of the night. If it's in a heavy industrial area, it'll stay up there midday. Now you got this energy source that's kind of up and down, and those traditional generation systems have to somehow keep up with it, and they can't. And as you get a certain amount of solar and wind on your grids, it becomes a bigger and bigger problem. In diesel remote applications, Alaska learned the hard way once it gets about 20% of the grid capacity. Literally, you hit a brick wall. You can't keep your grid stable, or saying it a different way, you can't keep, for any technology geeks on the phone, you can't keep voltage and frequency stable, which ultimately means your grid crashes. In larger grids, it could be in single digits. So what they've had to do is add batteries as kind of a stabilizer. And people think batteries have been traditionally added to move power from one time of the day to another. That's not really why they've been getting added. They've been getting added to essentially cushion these ups and downs of these other energy sources. So ultimately, the end result of this chaos is cost of power has actually been going up, even though we've been getting, I'll call it lower cost energy sources added. And of course, we've hit brick walls in how far we can take our solar and wind power to really harvest their long range benefits. Next slide. So now the solution. So if we kind of step back and think about those traditional power solutions, with the single fuel of coal or nuclear and everything nicely in balance and everything ultimately tied to that, now you step back and say, wait a second. We've been dependent on these limited resources that were only available in certain locations. Now we have solar and wind all around us. Well, let's start there. Let's start with the energy that's right where we're at. Let's go harvest that and to the best of our ability. And then we start seeing the grid. If it's a grid tied system, we see the grid more as a secondary power source. You certainly need to tie something in, because even with batteries tied into solar, as they become more cost effective, or wind, you still can't have full dispatchability or power certainty 24/7 unless you have some other energy source brought to the equation. So you know you have power certainty, but we really flipped the equation 180 degrees. So it's a grid tied system. Let's start where we have, as I say, the energy we have where we need it. Let's put in a battery, which as it's become more cost effective in more and more regions, that you can actually use that to harvest maybe 80 and even 90% of your energy in your location, and depend on that. And then again, and then as I said, we bring in the secondary source like the utility grid. Most people, even as much as they may hate their utility, they don't really want to detach. We could detach from the utility. There's other on-site resources we can bring in, and some ask us to do that. But for the most part, people really would like to keep their grid connection. That's all great. And we give them that option, but now maybe only 10 or 20% of their power is coming from their utility grid, where 90% or 80% of their power is coming from their on-site system. And oh, by the way, not only is their cost of power coming down, but now they know what the cost is going to be for the next 20 years. If it's an off-grid system, it's the same concept, except we don't use a grid. One of the special IP that we have is where they're now dependent on diesel in those locations. The reason we can't reduce the cost of power as much as we can on grid tie system is ultimately we still need a certain amount of diesel. But we run those diesel engines much more efficiently because of our technology, and we make them much more compatible with the solar and wind power that are usually available in those locations. Next slide. So because of the cost benefits, I'm sorry, go back to one slide. I probably skipped the most important point. Sorry about that. So if you think about the end benefit of it, is I'll show you case examples where we can reduce the cost of power by anywhere from 50 to 80%. We have one that actually is 90%. We also can make their power much more reliable, and we also can give them power certainty at all times. On their off-grid applications, as I mentioned, depending on where they are, we can also give them generally a 50%. It can be much higher than that. Again, it depends on really where they are on the globe. We have customers in the high Arctic. We just shipped a system. I'll just say it's about as high north in the planet as you can go. I tell
Santa
people
Claus?
if Santa Claus is there, he's next door. So obviously we don't have any sun in the wintertime there, and they have high load. So in that case, maybe we'd get to a 40 to 50% improvement. If you're going into more equator areas, if we were in Africa or areas in Asia or Central America, then those numbers would be a lot higher. Okay, sorry, next slide.
Can we get a quote from Santa on the reliability of the product? A big fan. No,
I'm going to work on it when I get to that next site where that system we just shipped is going.
that sounds good.
So in the market that we serve, I'd say to most people we talk to, the scale is very intuitive. We have a $43 billion market that should be growing. It's expected to grow well above 200 billion. And I frankly think this is all very conservative, because most people don't realize yet that what we're calling the grid tied market. If you think about you get on an airplane and we look down on the ground and we see all those pockets of light that are now rural communities that are being served by some utility 50 or 100 miles away. we see those now as a market because they have land. If we right size a solar stored energy systems, keep a grid connection if they choose to, that's now a market for us. Our biggest markets today are commercial industrial applications in California, New England, which are grid tied. So those aren't even identified in these numbers yet. So we see the market as quite vast. You can see the breakdown between grid tied and what we call grid tied or islanded. Our current focus, as I was alluding to in a few minutes ago, because the cost of power is the highest in California, outside of Hawaii and Alaska, we're mostly focused now in California. We'll be moving as we increase our sales capability into the New England states. New York is actually getting into that area where they'd be the customers in that state will be very interested. We already have customers in the Caribbean. We just sold a system to a solar battery system, grid tied system to a developer in Jamaica whose customer is the Jamaica government. So their cost of power is very high. And rural applications have been our market for quite some time from the beginning of our company. And we still see that as a significant market for us. We just shipped our first, we have a system operating in Canada for a number of years, or two systems. One was a utility customer in the Northwest Territories. We just sold and actually shipped our first system to the Canadian government for one of their Arctic locations. We have another one going to that, and then we have more systems that are going to be going to another one of their remote locations late this year. In terms of future growth areas, essentially, as you can envision, in the remote side, anywhere where you're basically dependent on power off grid. There's vast markets in Australia, parts of Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, Africa. So those are all really sizable markets for the remote applications. Candidly, usually the issues in those markets are, do they have money and who your partnerships are, so you have certainty of business there. When you get into where high cost of power is, that we solve those issues all across Europe, outside of the US, all across Europe is having the same problem. And many other developed parts of the world across Asia and other continents. Next slide. The way we generate revenue, or our different revenue streams, are, I touched on this a few minutes ago. So we do start on the design side. In many cases, if we believe we're going to get a product sale out of it, we don't charge for that work. But in cases where we're not sure, or we know for sure we're not going to get revenue out of an actual microgrid project, we actually charge for that service. So Kaiser Permanente is an example of that. Cummins has been an example where we did work for their fuel cell business a number of years ago. With no certainty, a great product with no certainty that we would be part of their solution. But customers also like the idea that, we may end up advocating something that the solution may not even be a microgrid. So we get revenue for that. On the microgrid side, our customers are typically utilities. They could be EPCs, or that's an abbreviation for those that don't know, engineering, procurement, construction companies. They often are the companies that well-known companies turn to say, hey, I want a power solution. They have very sophisticated engineering construction organizations. Innovus, we do not want to be in the construction business. It's a whole different business profile and liability. So we often partner with those companies, or those C&I companies, or EPCs or developers are in fact customers. And we're often going to market through those companies, not just for on-grid, but off-grid applications. So for instance, that Canadian government application I just described, which unfortunately I can't disclose the specifics of, that was actually, our customer is actually a major EPC that won the contracts to upgrade powerhouses across a number of government installations, and they were able to get the government to single source our solution to replace the diesel power systems in those locations. And then, obviously, and I think very excitingly, one of the big important aspects of our business model is when we bring in these different power sources, we don't want to see a customer who've already found themselves in this situation where they have multiple technologies that have come onto their sites, and they don't know who to call when they have a problem. When everything came through the utility, it's simple. I call my utility. You may not like their reaction time, but you know who to call. Well, you have solar, you have batteries, you may have a fuel cell, you may have other technologies on the site. Who's going to make sure it all works? It's functioning together. That's the role we're playing and going to play. So our systems not only control where the power is going and when, but we have the ability to monitor what's going on 24/7 with every system, subsystem, major component. So we can see when an issue is about to happen, we can prevent it. When an issue does happen, we can guide the corrective action. We can either lead the corrective action if we have the contract to do it, or we can advise a customer of where to go. And we get reimbursed for that service when we have to advise them, hey, look, go change this, go look at that. Obviously, for military customers, they're going to want to do that service themselves most often. But most commercial customers don't. That's not their business. We also, by the way, one other point, we also don't just have a capital sales market model. We are looking for financial partners because the ideal selling scenario, even though I haven't brought up what are the biggest challenges, especially in the grid-tied applications, it's really the capital cost of the solutions. Most companies don't want to pay $5 million to lower their energy costs if their business is manufacturing or developing X. They want to spend their money on their prime business. They don't really want to expend capital on reducing their cost of power. We have customers that are willing to do that, but the way to really develop that is bringing financial partners in where we basically own and operate the system. And now it's power as a service. We can either give them a power purchase agreement, or we can do it through lease to buy agreements. But that's really the way to have for that part of the business to break out. Next slide. A couple of case examples. I already mentioned the Canadian utility. That system was in service. It's been recently brought down for a rebuild. We had a system in operation for 5-6 years, accumulated about 35,000 hours, which is about 1.7 million miles for a vehicle. We had 2 unplanned shutdowns of the system. Neither of them affected the community. The community was running on our system 24/7. So highly reliable, met all the objectives. We have a large medical care provider, as I mentioned, who's doing our services. And we have more customers on this list. One I mentioned already, but the chart I want to mention here is the value proposition of why there's such an interest. So the chart on the right represents an actual study we did for a customer, a paid study we did of how to improve their cost of power. This facility already had a sizable solar installation that basically covered the peak demand for power for that facility. It was a medical office building in Northern California. They were paying about $1.7 million a year for power. And by basically doubling their solar system, which they have room for on that site, right sizing a battery system, putting them on the right utility structure, which is an important part of the analysis, and what our control system has to be able to do, we can take them down to about $300,000 a year. So, when you're seeing these numbers, we can see it's not trivial, but it also, of course, plays into the idea of doing an own and operate model too. If the savings are big enough, which they are, it's a win-win for everybody. Customers can see a much lower cost of power. They're willing to sacrifice some savings because anybody financing it certainly wants to have a good return on their money, and everybody wins. So it's an exciting market, and we're demonstrating every market we describe. We're demonstrating that we can do what we said we would do as we go forward. Next slide.
Yeah, I'd agree
Yeah,
that
I'd
a
agree that.
potential $50 million savings over 25 years is not trivial. Indeed, great case study.
Yeah, 1.3 million. That's 1.3 million. 1.4 million a year. So it's as I say, it's not trivial. And here's our team. Uh, Eric introduced me earlier, and I think the best thing I can say is obviously I'm a little younger in that picture, so I'm sorry for deceiving you all. That is picture a little bit dated. I think the takeaway that I'd like to say in this is as excited as I am about my background. And I think it's because I've seen businesses, I've been involved with business at large scale, so you understand what it takes to be successful in a larger scale operation. But I've also been through startups at a very early stage. And what I've learned through startups, including some of the earliest stage companies and taking them through mid stages, is you better tap into every piece of information you've ever learned in your life if you're going to be successful, and you better surround yourself by people that are tapping into everything they've ever learned in their life. So I've been very fortunate. John McCall, who's our chief engineer, you have to have one of those people who not just understands the big picture and takes us strategically where we need to go, but he can actually make sure the necessary engineering is done to the product itself, um, gets into the weeds of designing the product. And John's been out there wiring stuff and rewiring stuff if he's had to, because you have to really have deep knowledge in all the disciplines. One of the things I really loved about John's background and has similarity to mine is I've met John in my former company. He was servicing ocean going catamarans that had our power systems on them. And unfortunately, that system was not designed very well. Again, former company product no longer in service. But the point is, and that was developed by a predecessor group of people. But you learn the hard way, boy, if you don't have a product people can depend on, you're not going anywhere. So John learned that because he had to go and travel to those products that were failing. So we had to make sure that anything we build today, or since we started this company, had to be highly dependable for anything to get to, step two once you get past selling your first product. And lastly, Rich Bailey has been leading our business development and sales effort, and you can see his background. Very fortunate to have his diverse background involved in all the different areas of the business. So with that, I think that's my last slide. Questions?
All right, thank you so much. And I just stopped sharing now, and we have a couple of questions. Let me just move some things around my screen for a moment. Sorry, just so I can see everything. Okay, let's start with this question here. They said, first of all, great story, Mark. Innovus appears to have an innovative and compelling solution for high growth microgrid energy market. Can you share your 2024 actual and 2025 expected sales and earnings? And let's start there, and then there's a follow-up question.
Yeah, I might as well group together a few things that'll probably come with it. So 2024, I certainly will only say things that I can validate. We should be crossing for the first year into, I'll call it positive margin terrain, or we are. I just can't quantify the number. We're still finalizing because some accounting changes we made, what those 2024 numbers were. And we'll obviously publish those. Those will get reviewed through the Netcapital process. Going forward, so this year we're expecting somewhere, I'll call it in the mid single digits. Our pipeline is somewhere in the 40 to $60 million range. We all know that what you realize is a fraction of that. But we're very confident that we'll be in that, as I say, in that mid single digit area. One of the uses, and pardon for making my answer a little longer than I probably should, one of the purposes of the funds is really to expand on our sales organization. Right now, it's just Rich and I. We hired a part-time who became full-time inside sales guy to get more leads this past year, but that's really one of the things we need to get more revenue stream. But that's basically where we're at right now. for this year, for this coming year, mid-single digits.
And that's actually a good point. But I should have, between transitioning from your presentation to the questions, I want to add a link to the offering page again in here. We're getting towards the end of our programming, so I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to invest. Again, Innovus Power is actively raising capital on Netcapital. You can select the link that I just added into the chat feature here. You can go directly to netcapital.com/companies/Innovus Power, or you can go to Netcapital and search INNOVUS, and you'll be able to see the offering page, all the details, including financial history. And then if you're so inclined, you too can invest and own a piece of this company. Okay, great questions. And again, I just want to encourage everybody to continue to ask your questions. I love that they're coming in here. You guys are obviously very engaged with the presentation. Can we talk a little bit about your IP strategy? Can we talk a little bit about any patents that you have and defensibility that the company has on your underlying technology?
Yeah, our IP strategy has been so we patented the for our remote application control systems, which is highly similar to the grid-tied applications. So that's the IP where we can control the speed of the generators. That's a system that the Canadian government just purchased, and that Canadian utility purchased a number of years ago. But also that system can integrate other energy sources. So back to the broader answer to your question, I think our IP strategy is really extremely important in how we proceed forward. These control systems are really, as I said, the heart of what we do, and being out in front of where this is all going. There's a lot of capability we'd like to be able to bring into our control systems that not only we want to develop, but we frankly want to put patents around, especially when you get into control of resources of solar and wind power and others, in terms of how we do that more proactively than say we do it today. So I think the IP is really a key part of our business and a key part of the value of our business.
Fantastic, fantastic. And then another question here. What types of customers will see some of the bigger benefits if they deploy the Grid Genius platform? Good question.
Okay, so on the you typically hear me talk about two different major market segments. If it's remote, those customers would typically be, I'll call it remote communities, any remote communities. Right now, their power systems are archaic. Without going into the detail, to run a powerhouse for a remote community or a mining operation, they have to turn, because the gensets are so inefficient once they're not fully loaded, they literally have to turn them on and off depending on the time of day. They overlap them. They have major maintenance issues. So it's not just a fuel cost savings, it's a major maintenance cost savings and simplification story and supportability story. So pretty much remote communities, mining operations are probably in government installations that depend on diesel. They're, any of those would be great beneficiaries. On the grid-tied applications, the biggest savings we're seeing is in customers that frankly have more space. So that medical office building that I alluded to, they have enough parking lot space and rooftop space that they could fit the solar that really could capacity to cover their demands. And then the batteries, are getting so compact. The battery size is not an issue typically. So the biggest beneficiaries are one where you have enough space to cover that peak load. The more power you demand, if you can cover it with the more renewable energy you can cover it with, those are the ones that see the greatest cost savings, which is why we talk about remote, for instance, rural communities in the same regard. There are offsets for those. It's just not as high. So we do have a customer now, likely to become a customer in Northern California. They've filled up their rooftop. We have a couple of them, but one in particular, they filled up their rooftop. That still only handles about 25% or 30% of their full load capacity demands because they do manufacturing in that building. So we're going to bring in on-site generation sources. In this case, we're looking at a linear generator that can burn natural gas or hydrogen. to bring their cost of power down also. So their cost may go down maybe 50%, versus some of the ones where we can better leverage solar in those are the ones we'll see in the higher in the 70, 80, even 90% range.
Yeah, no, it depends. You have really, really great applications in those use cases. And you also mentioned a couple of really exciting customers, Kaiser Permanente, some elements of the Canadian military, Jamaican government. And that really made me think about beyond military application. I feel like there's a massive humanitarian and emergency response application here as well. Can we talk a little bit about that use case?
So emergency response is interesting. It really depends on how long they're really planning to use the system. We've talked to companies about packaging our system in a way, because we already have that first system that went to Northern Canada. It powered a remote community of about 550 people. That's the one that was in operation for 5, 6 years. Um, that was actually put inside a 40-foot container. We called it a mobile powerhouse that was positioned outside that powerhouse. If you go to our website, you'd see a picture of it. Um, that system was designed basically to be a mobile microgrid. So that one up there it had space. If we wanted to put stored energy in it, we could have. But typically, when you go back to emergency power, people frankly are not as interested in fuel cost savings. They're mostly interested in how do they get power as fast as they can. They don't care as much of what it takes, but frankly, if they have an installation where they think that being able to use the solar, what most people don't know, if they have solar there, they can't use it. We can use it. So it's amazing. It's surprise. I guess it's not a surprise. Most people that have sizable or any amount of solar don't realize that when the grid fails, they lose their power also, lose that power also. So yes, we have a role that we can play in emergency. We just frankly, that's another business development sales effort that
Yep.
we should really be going after. And we've had major rental companies like Agreco and others who've actually talked to us about, hey, can you provide a portable microgrid? And obviously the answer is yes. Lastly, on that, we've actually put in for military applications for that same purpose. Haven't had any success yet, but we have put in some applications. Unfortunately, these are applications that we're looking for, without exaggeration, hundreds of different problems and solutions. So we're not just competing for a power solution, we're competing for other problems they had.
Absolutely. And just in case anybody hasn't visited the website yet, I know you said that on this page there was the example that you described. Is that something we could see relatively quickly, or we could keep going into the other questions? Mark, do you see that example here on the screen share, or we could keep going into
Oh, I
the
don't know.
follow-up questions?
Not
Oh,
the. Well, if you look at the solutions, you'll see that you should see, or case studies.
yeah,
You should see the remote. You should see the. Keep scrolling.
I think I
Keep
remember seeing.
scrolling. Yeah, that's the case study. I don't see the picture.
Yeah, I think
I know it's on here. I'm sorry. I know it's on our website somewhere, the picture of that trail, of that container.
no, I
Uh,
remember seeing it too. I feel like, but we can hunt it down again. That's available on the website. And again, we do have the discussion board built into the Net Capital offering page. So if we can hunt that down, we can share that with you all. But I want to see if I could queue it up really quickly. But I couldn't remember where I saw it either. But a couple more great questions, and I know we got getting towards the end here. So I want to talk a little bit about the competitive landscape for this business model. You said a lot of people right now are using diesel as kind of the primary alternative for the off-grid power source solution. What I mean, and without naming names necessarily, what does it look like for other solutions out there that you're competing with?
um, we actually, if it's a diesel solution, I mean, we're clearly competing against traditional genset, we would call a traditional genset that's been around without exaggeration 100 years. Uh, they're simple machines. They're well-known OEMs that make them. Caterpillar, Cummins, um, MTU. There's just a bunch of them. Um, interestingly, those same competitors have become suppliers and supporters of our product because for when we put a grid genius variable speed generation system out to a customer, we need somebody's engine. So as an example, the systems that we're shipping to Canada, um, actually should have first one should have been received as we're sitting here. That's those first next two, including that one, will have Caterpillar engines. So Caterpillar is actually a supplier in those systems. That's going to be a diesel solar system with stored energy. We have other systems where customers have specified they'd like Cummins. And by the way, Caterpillar Cummins, this first system we shipped had an MTU engine. They also have a genset. They see us as much as a potential customer as they see us as a competitor. And in some cases, they've actually offered to package our stuff with their stuff to actually sell our stuff. I think that's actually going to happen more over time. I think early on, you kind of struggle with when we first went to market, we actually went through, we got a number of MTU power system distributors on board as wanting to resell our system. The first customer we had in Northern Canada was introduced by them. But as often is the case when you're trying to partner with somebody that's used to selling their own stuff, their salespeople continued to want to sell their own stuff. So we got to a point where we have to have a certain amount of traction in the marketplace when customers start to say, hey, wait a minute, I don't want what you've been selling me for the last 50 years. I want a system with an Innovus Grid Genius system. And actually, we're already starting to see that. So we have a number of inquiries, not just inquiries, we have a number of proposals we're working on right now with a Canadian, I'll call it power company. And they're actually going to answer RFPs with our systems, but they're also going to work with some of those quote competitors on how do we combine forces on some of these RFPs. By the way, on domestic on grid tied systems, it's a different equation because we actually have a meaningful advantage in that regard because you're at a disadvantage when you come through the door and you say, and these are great companies, but you're at a disadvantage when you come through the door and you have a brand name that people associate with an engine or they associate with batteries or they associate with solar panels. Because as actually one of our customers said to us a number of years ago, I don't know who to believe. I think the fossil guys are trying to sell me more fossil generation than I need. The solar guys doing the same thing, or gals, the battery guys. So we actually have an advantage not being tied to any given technology when it comes to power generation or power conversion.
Really just trying to find the right solution for the client, regardless of,
Exactly,
and it might be
exactly. And
more
that's how
hybrid
this
than people want to admit, I imagine.
exactly. And that's why, I like to refer to our model as a visualization as a hub and spoke. It's really, we don't care. We're agnostic. We don't care what goes around the spoke. When I say we don't care, we care in the context of what works best for that customer. That's why I gave you the example earlier. We're going to maximize the solar. We don't care whose OEM solar we use, as long as we know it works and it's cost competitive. We have, as I said, we have a linear generator we're about to propose on one of the projects we've been evaluating. That's a new technology out there. It's much more electrically efficient. And so, as I say, we actually, I think, have an advantage in that market, a meaningful advantage there.
Very cool. Very cool. Last couple of moments here. I want to sneak in a couple more questions. So let's talk a little bit about what the future looks like. And I always preface this question with the future is inherently uncertain and speculative. But can we talk about, some other, some you talked about some of the major successes up to this point. You're ramping up, business development expertise, driving sales. But let's talk a little bit about maybe, one or two, tweaks in the future that you're excited about, or relationships in the future that you're excited about. We could tie that into potential exit strategies before we sneak in the last couple of questions.
Well, I think the one thing I'm excited, one of the things I'm really excited about, and I was actually touching on this on that customer a few seconds ago. So the company that is now wanting to take us to proposals, they have relationships. This is a Canadian company. They have relationships all across Canada. Again, unfortunately, I can't mention who they are, but in some provinces, they're literally a utility. In other provinces, they do distribution. They develop powerhouses. I mean, they hit on almost every cylinder of what we do. Um, so when they see what we're doing on this first Canadian government installation, this company actually has the contract to do this maintenance support for that same location. We just found out, they just realized and they are now looking at their other installations on the remote side to do that. And they also have grid tied opportunities because of their transmission business. So, I was at a conference in the Yukon last fall, and there's not enough power up there. Believe it or not, they have they have population growth. They're building affordable housing. They're putting solar on top, but they're still having outages every week. They depend on hydro up there. There's not enough of it. So they see us as a party that can come in with a technical and product solution. But back to your question, but here is this well-established business entity. They have relationships. They know how to tie everything. How are we going to tie this into the utility grid physically? And so having a potential partner like that is very exciting to me. It's probably one of the most exciting relationships we've had to date, and it doesn't preclude others we've had. We've had great relationships with other companies in the U.S. like Cummins and Caterpillar and a few others, but these guys hit on more things than we've been doing in the past. So, and frankly, they could also be an investor. They could be an acquirer. Who knows? But
Yeah.
they're a really good fit for us.
No, that is exciting. I'm super excited about that opportunity. I love what you've been able to do in the medical and healthcare space. When I think about where you need to avoid outages, the health system is one of those ones that comes to mind immediately. So I think those are both exciting pieces. And then since we're coming down to the last little bit here, let's talk a little bit about, actually, let's try to see if we can sneak in this last question. Um, if the control algorithms and VSG technology provide such clear efficiency and integration benefits, what exactly prevents established companies like Caterpillar, Siemens, Cummins from developing similar systems? So a little bit of how you differentiate yourself. And then is it purely a matter of technological complexity and IP barriers, or a strategic choice to avoid cannibalizing their existing products? That's a good question. You
I
have
think the
1 minute.
last, I think the last part of it is it's certainly always been a barrier. You always have an issue with cannibalization and reluctance. Um, but also, lastly, I think we'd be arrogant to say others can't figure it out. The question is how long and how much money does it take to figure it out? So, for instance, running a diesel engine the way we run them, others have tried it and they have a hard they stall them out. I mean, they throw a big load on it, and it just like pulling your clutch off, taking your foot off the clutch on a manual transmission, you stall. And so it's not easy to solve these issues. But I think the best path for us is it's going to take time. They're frankly better off partnering with us than they are trying to copy and take 4, 5, 6 years to get to where we're at. But I think, and frankly, the more we develop in the future with funding, we'll just stay ahead. I think that's the best answers I can come up with for a very good question.
Yeah, the age-old dilemma of buy versus build, and I think people are really appreciative of that answer. Okay, if we could do two last questions here. How outside, obviously, you're actively raising capital. The link is in the chat. You can go to netcapital.com, learn more, and invest. But outside of cash, how can folks support you? I always like hearing that. That'd be relationships or introductions or anything like that. And then in closing remarks, why is now the perfect time to go and invest in your company?
I think I always loved having relationships that can help the business. If they're tied to cash, even great. I'd rather have strategic financial investors if I can, who can make those introductions, help with the story. I mean, want to be involved in the company. So even if they're not an investor, having people that are knowledgeable, excited about what we're doing. I can think of it's back to what I said at the beginning. Surround yourself with people, everybody you can find that's tapping into everything they've ever known, and you're going to learn something that you didn't know if you didn't. So I think that's I think great. love to have people involved any way they can be. The last question was about the why invest. I think we're at a perfect stage. Typically companies, if they're raising this type of money, they haven't yet proven themselves. There's just a lot of risk, and we're certainly risk. I'd be lying if I didn't tell you there's risk. But we're at that really great value point where we've got technology, we've got customers, we know the product works, we've got credible customers that are bringing us more customers. So I don't think you can find a better inflection point for a company going into what I think is as big a market as people would typically see, in terms of the opportunity we can take advantage of.
Love that, Mark. Thanks for bringing it home there. And especially with the proliferation of these data centers running these generative models, the demand for energy based off your data suggests that's going to continue to increase, and solutions like this might be higher in demand. Okay, so with that being said, thank you so much for all of our attendees and your fantastic questions. Thank you so much, Mark, for coming on and sharing about what you're building with Innovus Power. As I mentioned, you could go directly to netcapital.com and you can search INNOVUS and you can invest. Thank you so much for all the love in the chat there and the feedbacks there. You can select the link that I've added to chat there and go directly to the offering page, learn more, and you can invest. Or you can go directly to netcapital.com/companies/Innovus Power, INNOVUS POWER. So I added that back into the chat there. If you or anybody you know was unable to attend, or if you missed some of this, this has been recorded. We will upload it to the Netcapital YouTube channel shortly. Added a link to that back into the chat there. But you can just search Netcapital on YouTube and you'll see this there relatively shortly. So if you know somebody who might be able to support or might be interested in learning more, please share this generally. And if you missed anything or if you want to see something again, feel free to go back and check that out. But thank you so much for all of our attendees. And thank you so much to Mark for what you're doing here and allowing people to own a piece of this journey with you.
Thank you all for carving out. Everybody doesn't have any time for anything these days, but thanks for carving out time for this, and really appreciate your interest.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.